Hey guys, it's Rogaway here, and today we are looking at how to use composition rules to make our photos more interesting. Now, a lot of these composition rules we've looked at, and you guys may have already started to apply them to your photos, but it's good to know how to actually enhance them, and we're going to use Photoshop to actually bring out some of those details of that photo or those photos a little bit more. Okay, so I got 3 photos I'm going to work with here just to sort of emphasize different rules. I got this one, and this one. And we're going to look at how we can enhance the composition rule that's in use for each of these photos. So I'm going to start with the fox, and I'm going to open it with Photoshop. And there it is. I'm just going to hit Command 0 here so that it's nice and full screen. Now, this photo, this is going to be quite a short lesson today, but this photo is probably a good candidate for rule of thirds. And the reason I say that is because we do have this fox sort of off to one side. We have a bit of grass here that kind of, it doesn't really add anything to this shot. So we can kind of get this photo a little bit better situated so rule of thirds is in use. And in Photoshop, that is built in quite nicely. So if I go to the 5th tool down, it looks like 2 lines crossing each other. That is the crop tool. And if I use the crop tool and I click it, you'll notice that these little boxes become available along the edges. Now, this crop tool has a bunch of things that we can use to make our photo better. It'll also recreate or cut out the pixels that we don't need to sort of have in the final photo. We can get rid of things. That's the whole point of cropping. But you'll see up here there's a couple of options. So the straighten option is kind of interesting. What this will do is, let's say you took a photo and the camera wasn't perfectly level. You can straighten out the horizons or any areas of the photo that need to be corrected. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I click the straighten tool, it's going to ask me to draw a line. So you see how this snow bank is going at an angle? If I was to try to straighten that out, let's say draw it across, it'd say that it's about 8 degrees. And if I let go, it will make that a straight line and make it look like it's flat. Now in this case, we don't really want that because I think this sort of this line in the background complements this photo nicely. But also within this tool, you will see this grid. And inside of here, we'll see all sorts of different ways we can line up sort of the elements within our shot so that they are more dramatic. And the most basic one is rule of thirds. But you can see that there's a whole bunch of different choices here for other ones if you want to experiment with those as well. But the rule of thirds, easy to understand. Basically, it says anything that's important is going to be placed on the intersection of the third lines. And you'll notice that when we select it, nothing shows. We don't see that. The only time that grid shows up is when I go to my edge of my window and I click and I start to transform or crop this picture. And you'll notice now when I start to crop it that grid will show up. And now I'm going to put that intersection of those 2 lines, as you can see there on the eye of the fox. I'm going to move the intersection of those 2 lines onto the eye of the fox. As you can see right here, cross right on that part. Now, just typical sort of rule of thirds, the way to use it is you want to put the areas of interest on one of these intersection points. And that's exactly what I did here is I put the eye of the fox on that intersection. And I'm going to hit return. And there we go. Now that's the new crop. Again, this is nothing very drastic here, but technically now it is correct. It's using rule of thirds properly, and it's just a little bit, we know that it's mathematically correct because we've checked by making sure that part of the photo is exactly in that rule of thirds intersection. All right, so that's cropping. Now let's look at another one. This one is a good example of a few rules actually. We got pattern here, We got contrast. Okay, we got this one red tomato that stands out from the rest. This is good practice to get into so that, you know, when you're taking photos, you're looking for things that are different, that stand out. Or you could set this up and make this shot, and it's going to make it a heck of a lot more interesting than just having a bunch of green tomatoes. So let's do the very thing we just did. We're going to take our crop tool. We're going to make sure that the red tomato is in that rule of thirds intersection, just like that. So you see where it was originally? Not perfect, but close. We're going to move it down so it's kind of centered within that space. Hit return. Boom. Next, what we want to do is we want to draw more attention to the green of the tomato, okay, or the red of the tomato, sorry. And there's a couple ways we can do that, and we've looked at these techniques before. We can use color correction. Let's maybe review that. If we go to image adjustments, do something like selective color, we can enhance the red of the tomato if we want. We can change that color a bit, make it more intense, less intense. You got to be careful here. You don't want to make it look fake, but you do want to maybe enhance it a bit so that it stands out a little more. And then what you can also do is take away some of the sort of focus from the greens. So you can go to greens and you can pull those back a little bit. It's going to mostly be yellows and cyans here, but you can see how it's affecting those greens. Okay, and I'm just going to pull it back a little bit so that those are a little less intense. That way that red really pops. And hit OK. All right, we can also do something like brightness and contrast. If we wanted to, maybe I'll do a little bit of that. Adjustments, brightness, contrast. Minor tweaks like we would normally do on a picture. You know, do a little bit of color correction, make sure it looks good. Hit OK. Now, let's say you had a part of your image that you really wanted to draw attention to, but maybe your camera, it didn't focus correctly, or everything's kind of in the same sort of line of focus, so it doesn't really stand out from the things around it. I can show you a quick technique. You can use this for all sorts of different things, but we're going to create a selective sort of focus on the tomato itself. And that's really easy to do. We're going to go into our second tool down, which is right now a rectangular marquee, and we're going to go to the elliptical marquee. Okay? Elliptical in the ellipse can be a circle, it can be an oval, it can be whatever, but basically we're just going to be creating a circular shape because the tomato is circular. All right? Now, one thing you can do up here under feather is you could set this number to something like 10 or 20 or whatever to soften the edge, but we're going to do that after the fact. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to go and draw a selection around the tomato, something like this. Now, if you happen to screw up and let's say it's too far off, you can hold the space bar and you can move that selection around as long as you don't let go of the mouse button. Okay, you can move this until you let go, and that will become sort of the new selection. So you let go, there it is. Then if we want to fine tune this selection, we can go up to the select menu, we can go to modify. And you'll see inside modify there's all sorts of things you can do with a selection. So you can contract it so you can make it smaller, you can expand it to make it bigger, or you can feather it to make it softer. And that's the one we're looking for here. We're going to feather it 10 pixels. It should be good for this, and we're going to hit OK. Now you won't see anything change. The picture looks exactly the same. The only thing we did is we modified the selection. So now the edge of this selection is actually soft. It's not going to be a hard edge. And that's going to be important for this next step. We're going to go up to filter, blur, lens blur, and we're going to click that. Now you'll notice this kind of looks stupid because the tomato is the part that's blurred out and everything else is sharp. We don't want that. We want to click invert right here and reverse it so that the tomato is sharp but the rest are blurred out. And we can adjust sort of, well, there's a whole bunch of adjustments we can make here. We can set a focal point, which is kind of interesting. You can actually click a part that should be in focus. Okay. You can change the shape of the lens, the iris of the lens. So this is the actual aperture. I leave these as default. But the radius is going to control how much of a blur everything else is taking on. Okay, is it going to be a lot like that, which looks horrible, or is it just going to be a little bit so that it puts a little more attention on this? So that's what I'm going to do here. We can adjust the blade curvature, the rotation, the highlights, how bright or how dark the highlights are. All of these are trying to simulate how a lens would actually blur out the areas that were not in focus. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we can hit OK. Boom, press Command D, and there we go. Okay, so you can see how the attention to this one tomato has become more dramatic. If I go to my history, I'll just show you the before and after. It's not always going to be an improvement, okay? You might say, oh, the first one looks better, but these are just techniques you can apply to making your photos more dramatic, okay? So in this case, this stands out really good now. I might consider that to be done. Next, we're going to look at one more thing here. We're going to open up, we're going to combine some techniques here. We're going to look at this windmill. I'm going to open it with Photoshop. And we're going to take a couple things here that we're going to do. And specifically because it's a black and white photo, we're going to adjust it. So first thing, the draw there's a few things going on here. We've got this windmill, which stands out. We've got leading lines in the bricks leading us sort of towards it. We've got black and white, so we've got contrast in the shot. And, you know, they did try to use, it could be rule of thirds, but they did try to put this off to one side so it wasn't centered. So let's first of all sort of enhance the rule of thirds that's being used. So we're going to go take our crop tool and we're going to try to pull, you know, the windmill. We probably won't get it perfect, but we'll just try to get it in sort of an intersecting area again of the rule of thirds, and then we're going to hit return. There it is. Then what we're going to do is we're going to maybe increase the contrast of this shot so that it stands out even more. So this is going to be a little bit of color correction. We're going to go image adjustments, brightness contrast, tweak the brightness ever so slightly, and bring up your contrast so the dark and light areas really pop. Okay, something like that is going to be pretty good. Okay, now this is a kind of a low-res image, so I apologize. But we also got something else going on. We got these old cobblestone sort of pavers that are here, and they do have some texture on them. So if we want to bring out some more detail within the shot, let's say we want to enhance it a little bit if it was a little out of focus or kind of soft, what we can do is go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And even though the name implies that it's unsharpening it, it sharpens it. I don't understand, but that's the name. And the way this works is if you pull this down, the amount, or you pull it up, you'll see that it tries to bring out all these little details. Now, one neat thing about this little window that Photoshop has is if you move the mouse cursor inside of here, as it's dragging, it will show you the before, and when you let go, it'll show you the after. Okay, so you can see how dramatic of a result you've made. All right, so I'm going to tweak it to kind of where I think it might look good. It's got a lot of detail, about 30%. And then the radius is how big of an area it's going to affect. So if I crank this, it's going to look horrible, but it's going to affect a bigger area. If I keep it small, it's pretty much going to be sharpening on a 3-pixel basis, so a small part of the picture. Threshold, we're not even going to touch. We're going to hit OK. All right, so we brought out some details here, a little bit more in the shot. Again, this is kind of a low-res image, so it's not going to make a huge dramatic amount of difference. But on a shot that you take, let's say, of a detailed scene, it definitely helps to pull out some of those little details that might have been softened otherwise. Another effect we're going to do to really enhance sort of the look of this shot is we're going to apply a vignette. And a vignette is either darkening or lightening the edge of a photo to sort of draw more attention to the middle. And there's an easy way to do this in Photoshop. If you go to Filter and you go to Lens Correction, all right, Lens Correction will allow you to adjust the image within this window that opens up. Now, if I go over here to Custom, it's going to give me some options that I can do to adjust the lens that was used to photograph. And you may notice, or you may have heard before, like somebody says, oh, you took a photo of me, but I look fat, or most people won't ever say they look skinny. But there is some truth to that because every lens has a certain amount of distortion that it puts on the characters that you're photographing. So if you reduce the distortion, it becomes more fish-eyed. And if you increase the distortion, it becomes more, it just looks like it's farther away. So you'll see how that distorts from the center out. So you can adjust that, you can tweak that and make it look better. You also have your vignette options right here. So if you go to the left, you can darken the edge of the picture. If you go to the right, you can lighten the edge of the picture. And you can also adjust the midpoint. So how far in does the vignette come? Does it come right in, or does it just stay close to the edge? You can tweak that. All right. I like putting vignettes on my picture. It really helps to draw in the viewer. It's a very subtle effect and it looks good. A couple more things down here are like transformations. So if you wanted to put more focus on, let's say, the sky or the top part of the photo or the ground, okay, you can tweak your vertical perspective. Okay. Again, these I don't recommend using. They tend to skew and distort the image. You also got horizontal perspective, so you can pull one side over or the other side over, depending on what you want it, how you want it to look. Okay, something like that, and I would hit OK. All right, so you can see that if I go to the before and after, we'll just go through my history and look at the before and after. I'm not saying that this is an improvement, but it's definitely more of a dramatic, more contrasty result. And in this case, it may enhance the photo if that's what I wanted to do. So again, those are just 3 real quick little tips on ways you can enhance the composition rules, how you can make them stand out more. Basically, what you want to do is remove the areas that have less interest and improve or increase the exposure of the areas that you want to draw the focus to. All right, that's about it. All right, make sure you save it and continue on because we're going to have a bunch more things related to composition coming up. Until next time, thanks for watching. See you later.